Hello, everybody. Thank you so much, Nick and the Stephs. Wait, that'd be a great band name, Nick and the Stephs. Really want to make that happen. My name is Patrick. I do marketing here at Swoogo. You've probably seen me in your inbox, which is probably why you're here now. Before we get started, I want to tell a quick story. Before I joined Swoogo, I was working at a company where I was in charge of their big digital event. If you would ask me then what my goal for that event was, I'd say get 1,000 people there. And we did end up doing that. We had about 1.5 thousand people attend, but 2 months later, my CMO came to me and said, "Hey, Patrick, how much money did we make off of that event?" And I did not have an answer. But I thought, I brought so many people together. Of course, we made a boatload of money, right? Pulled the numbers and not really. What we learned is that when we set those goals of just saying, I want 1,000 people there, everything that we did leading up to that was towards that goal of getting people there, but we weren't getting the right people there. We weren't thinking about content that would drive people to the next step. And we weren't thinking about what action items we want to take after the event to continue adding value for attendees. I really wish I had met Nicola Kastner before then, because she has some great thoughts all around setting goals for your events. Nicola, do you mind introducing yourself for everyone?
Yeah, sure. Thanks. So Nicola Kastner, I'm based in Toronto. Hey, to any Canadians that are watching. I have my own company called The Event Strategist, where I consult with brands to how to optimize their event marketing strategies. But prior to starting my consulting practice, I was the global vice president of event marketing strategy for 5.5 years at SAP. So large enterprise company, a lot of large events. The largest and biggest of them, probably the most well-known, was Sapphire, that fell under my purview. So I spent a lot of time walking in the trenches and walking in the shoes of a lot of people that are on the call today. Part of that, I consulted before joining SAP, and I also worked on the agency side. So I spent a lot of time working with my internal clients about how to define their event strategies up front. I believe in the power of events. I fell in love with the power of events through a session that I took at a conference and about event strategy. So I always have this need to pay it forward. But so I'm thrilled to be here. Thanks for having me.
Awesome. Thank you for joining. Have to admit, was a bit starstruck when we first had a meeting because I've been following you on LinkedIn for a little while. And I want to pull up one thing that you had mentioned on LinkedIn somewhat recently. You had called it the Business of Events Framework. Can you explain this to folks real quick?
Yeah, absolutely. So, where this came from or where this started, this is a framework I've always used. I didn't call it the Business of Events Framework until recently, until all of this discussion started happening about the C-level event roles and everybody wanting to have a seat at the table. And my theory is, in order to do that, we have to speak in the language of business, not in the language of events. So we need to think about events as a business venture that are designed to produce outcomes. So I started to write the series. I'm midway through the series. You can go back and look at it, but it basically takes this 5-step framework that I've talked about here and breaks down each step from my experience with my clients and so forth throughout the years to help others and just try to change the narrative around our industry. And I love the model that you've built, because if we want that seat at the table, we have to move beyond that level 1 and level 2 for sure. And so there was definitely an alignment about what you were doing here and what I'm trying to talk about. So here I am. So thanks for having me.
For sure. Do you mind talking through a little bit about the goals that folks should be setting beyond just, like we mentioned, registration and attendance? You had brought up this slide on that LinkedIn post as well. And I'd love if you could talk through about what each of those mean.
Yeah, happy to. So there's 2 types of metrics that I talk about, just for a little bit of context. There's success metrics and diagnostic metrics. The diagnostic metrics allow you to answer the why. Those are where I see things like registration, number of people, those type of things sitting in. For success objectives, they need to be set up front. You need to have conversations with stakeholders, your internal stakeholders, to align on what success looks like. I mean, think about it. You're blindfolded otherwise. If you don't know what you're working towards, how can you communicate success at the outset? So to your story, Patrick, about, well, I thought my goal was have 1,000 people register. Well, if you hadn't asked the question, how would you know that there were other expectations around that. So I really encourage that people think about asking the questions up front. And so I categorize success objectives. There's a whole other layer on this as well in the model, which talks about the diagnostic, which are a lot of the event input metrics into these 4 categories: brand and perception. So those are objectives that are, looking at, did the event change the mindset and influence the audience in the way that we intended? There's sales impact, which obviously is a direct alignment to the revenue model that we're talking about today. But you can't create sales impact without having positive brand and perception objectives as well. There's engagement. Did people engage with your content in the right way? And then there's financial performance. And traditionally, I actually put financial performance as a diagnostic metric, not a success metric. But I knew that if I posted something on LinkedIn and didn't talk about the financial performance of the event, both revenue and sponsorship and ticket revenue, I would be crucified. So I put it in here. So understanding and having conversations with your stakeholders about which of these objectives are important. And there's multiple. I would say probably a large flagship of event, you're going to have probably 5 at minimum, sometimes up to 10 distinct objectives that you are designing the event to achieve. So once you understand these, this is step 1. Once you understand all of your stakeholder needs, and those are your attendee needs, and really diving into what your attendees need, not just what the company or the person paying for the event wants the event to do. Once you understand those 2 things, then you can actually start to think about designing the right experience. So my recommendation to people is really back up, understand the business impact that you're trying to create before you jump into actually planning the event.
Absolutely. Absolutely. I love what you mentioned there about there's these diagnostic metrics and then there's success metrics, because of course, increasing registrations and getting people at the event is important, right? We don't want to knock that. So thinking about that as like, how good are we at events, right? And then how good are we at making the most of these events?
Yeah.
When we're thinking about this maturity model, the previous session, we talked a lot about stage 1 and stage 2. How do you increase registrations and how do you capture those attendee insights? But I'm curious, do you have any advice for folks online of what are some of the goals that you should be setting for that stage 3, creating leads and pipeline, and who should you be working with?
Yeah, absolutely. And I have some visuals, but they're just too complicated to show here. So if anybody wants to read deeper on this, they can find them on my LinkedIn profile. But ultimately, it's about understanding what you're trying to achieve and then partnering with the right organizations to achieve it. So just because an event, say a goal was set that we want to accelerate pipeline. And an accelerating pipeline, in order to accelerate pipeline, that means you need to have the right accounts there. You have to partner with your internal stakeholders to identify who are the right accounts. How are we going to get them there? How are we going to hold teams accountable for getting them there? And I'll use an example of how to flip the conversation. I was working with a client recently, and they said, well, 50% of our registrations are from top pipeline relevant accounts. I said, okay, well, what does that 50% of your registrations represent of your top pipeline accounts? You might have the bottom, like there's scales of pipeline relevant account. Build out a model where you scale them and you make sure you need to focus on your top 1, 2, 3, 4. You need to create a value proposition. You have to work with your internal sales teams or customer success teams, depending on how the organization is structured, to build a strategy to get those people there and a way to deliver value to them. Understanding that up front allows you to say, okay, these are the things that we need to identify through the registration process. These are the actions that we need to put in place in order to achieve getting X amount of people or the desired people to the event. And these are the tactics we need to put into the event. A meetings program, for example, is the number 1 tactic. If you're looking to accelerate pipeline, you need to create conversations between customer to customer, or prospect to sales, to executives. You have to facilitate that. So you need to build the infrastructure to do that. But you also need to bring, to the early conversation, you have to bring these teams along in the journey with you. And you do that by sharing data, sharing success, sharing impact, and driving shared accountability across the organization.
Absolutely love that. I got one question in here from the direct chat, by the way. Don't be shy. Feel free to throw it in the Q&A. Other people can upvote it. One of the questions here was around brand and perception. How do you create metrics around brand and perception?
So really these focus on sort of two categories: brand perception of the company and perception of the event. And so if your goal is to, and sometimes these are somewhat nebulous, but if your goal is to say that position your company as an innovative thought leader, let me tell you, I've heard that 1,000 times in my career. What the heck does that mean? Well, that's where you start to dive back and say, okay, how do we know that we've done that? And that's traditionally through an NPS score or I believe this company is a thought leader. I mean, I'm oversimplifying it here, right? But through the survey, through whatever measurement metrics you're going to use. And I have this whole framework that I use on pre-post that I'm happy to share if anyone wants to reach out, or like I said, you can find it. But so you have to find a way to measure what it was coming in. That starts at your level 1. That's through your registration data. You ask that question: how innovative do you think we are? Right? Then you measure that in your post survey. You measure that on site through feedbacks. You measure that through QR codes at the end of your keynote, because that's traditionally the thing that moves the needle quite significantly. You put in measurement metrics to capture that. So pre-post, and you can see that the event has done, how the event has supported that or not. I hope that answers the question.
Oh, that's perfect. I love the leaning on that survey data and the information that you're getting directly from your attendees. Let them tell you what they think.
And your registration is so important to capture the right insights. When I was at SAP, we put 3 to 4 questions. I think it was 4, actually. Somewhere 3 or 4, I haven't looked back at it in a long time, that we built into our registration platform so we could have the right data to do our post-event follow-up. And one of the most important was, why are you coming? What do you need out of this event? And in many cases, certainly for a large flagship event like Sapphire, it was 24,000 people the last year that I was responsible for it. I couldn't move the needle that quick with registrations coming so late. But I had those insights. I could see year over year trends. So when I was able to take those into the next planning cycle as well.
Absolutely. Absolutely. It's amazing how many folks don't ask questions like that on registration, right? It was a huge unlock for us with Event Different, where just a little drop down that said, would you like to add some additional questions? Or answer
ask the right questions though, right? If you ask too much, you are going to, and especially if it's a free event, people will be like, forget it. It's not worth my time. So there's a fine line balance. When it's a paid event, it's completely different.
That's a really good point. Love that concept of good friction, right? If you're asking questions that you think will help elevate the experience, go ahead and ask them. If it's data you already have, don't ask it.
Absolutely.
All right, perfect. There's one last question that I'd love to ask, which is, how do you keep your stakeholders accountable for the goals? So if this is a large event and you have 10 goals, you might not necessarily be the one who's really driving all of those goals as an individual event planner. How do you keep the rest of your team accountable?
So there's 2 teams. There's your own events team, and then there's your internal stakeholders. So let's use sales as an example. I will work with sales leadership to put in, if you have told me that this is critical and I have results, especially if you have the data that shows the impact that an event can have on accelerating pipeline, going back to that same example, I always talk about putting in control mechanisms and accountability mechanisms with them so that we have regular check-ins. They hold their teams accountable for driving the right people to the event, because there is a benefit. You have to be able to articulate the value proposition of the why, right? But once you've done that, you have to make those teams your partners. In terms of your events teams, having clear objectives and allows you to map clear tactics of things that are important and are not important, which is actually probably one of the more important things. When you're in a large enterprise organization like I came from, every flavor of the week is a priority and you're expected to include it in your event. But if you've got these objectives that are really clearly defined on what the event's expected to achieve, it gives you an ability to actually say no, which is really powerful as well.
For sure, for sure. I bet there's a lot of folks on this call who really want to level up to the ability to say no.
Yes.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much. So much knowledge packed into that 15-minute segment. I think this is also a great transition because as you're thinking these goals, you can't do it alone. You have to have such strong partnerships, like you mentioned, with your go-to-market team, that's your sales and marketing. So I'm really excited to bring up Mark Killens to the stage for the session, events and go-to-market teams. They're going to walk through ways that you can partner with your sales and marketing teams to make the most of your event, because events are a team sport. Thank you so much, Nicola, and encourage everybody to go follow you on LinkedIn. It's like a breath of fresh air every time I see a new post.
Thank you so much for having me.